Grayson, the former Sangamon County Sheriff's deputy who was convicted of murdering Sonya Massey, has died in prison today. But if you recall, back in July of 2024, Sonya Massey called 911 because she thought someone was lurking on the outside of her house. And so when officers arrived, it included Sean Grayson, and after searching the outside of her house, they went inside of her house. And that interaction results in Sean Grayson shooting and killing Sonya Massey.
The last time Sean Grayson described what happened inside Sonya Massey's kitchen, he wasn't under oath, and he wasn't in front of a jury. He was in a cell, writing by hand, asking to be let go. And in that document, the one where he needed the state's sympathy more than at any other moment of his life, he still wrote that Sonya Massey attacked him. No apology in it, no acknowledgement of the verdict, just the same account 12 jurors had already refused to believe. 23 days after a state board read that application and voted him down, Sean Grayson was dead. You know this case. You've seen the footage. You know how the trial ended. You know he was the rare American police officer actually convicted for an on-duty killing. So I'm not going to walk you back through the shooting. What I want to show you is the ending. The 3 weeks that close this story out, and the specific questions the state of Illinois has left sitting on the table. Because he had cancer is the easy answer. It's also not a complete one. Start with what should be the simplest fact of all: how he died. His attorney, Daniel Foltz, confirmed the death, August 23rd, around midday Central Time. And then, nothing. Foltz declined to provide details. The Illinois Department of Corrections didn't answer reporters' questions. As of the latest reporting, no official cause of death has been released at all. What we have instead are sources, people close to the situation, and the attorneys for Massey's family, pointing to the cancer everyone already knew about. Now, is cancer the likely explanation? Almost certainly. This was not a healthy man. But notice what's actually been confirmed versus what's been assumed, because that gap is where the questions live. And there's a second detail that makes the silence louder. According to the State Journal-Register, Grayson wasn't even being held in Illinois. He was in custody out of state. A former Illinois deputy, convicted in one of the most watched cases in the state's recent history, died somewhere outside the state that convicted him, and the agency responsible for him said nothing about the circumstances. Keep that in your back pocket. We'll come back to why he might have been moved. Because to understand the timing, you have to go back 3 weeks, to July 31st. That's the day Sean Grayson's fate was actually decided, not by a court, but by 3 people you've probably never heard of, the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. Here's the situation they were handed. In May, Grayson had filed for medical release under the Joe Coleman Act, an Illinois law passed in 2022 that lets terminally ill or medically incapacitated prisoners ask to serve their final months at home. On paper, Grayson was exactly the kind of person the law was written for. Stage 3 colon cancer, diagnosed back in 2023, before he ever set foot in Sonya Massey's home. By his sentencing, his own lawyers said it had progressed to stage 4 and spread to his liver, his lungs, his rectum. In court, reporters described him as gaunt and thin, a different man from the one in the body cam video. So the machinery of the law was there for him, and on July 31st the board voted, 3-0, denied. And the reasoning behind that no is the part I want you to sit with, because it's going to matter more than it first appears. The person who fought hardest to keep him in was the man who prosecuted him, Sangamon County State's Attorney John Milhiser. He wrote a letter to the board, and the argument he made was surgical. He didn't just say Grayson was dangerous. He said, according to Capital News Illinois, that Grayson had cancer when he committed this murder, and that his medical condition was explicitly considered at sentencing. Sit with that. The cancer wasn't new information. The judge already knew Grayson was dying when he handed down 20 years. The illness had already been weighed, already been factored in. Releasing him now, Milhiser argued, would mean giving him a discount the court had already declined to give. To let him out, he wrote, would be a miscarriage of justice and an insult to Sonya Massey's memory and family. The board agreed. And it's worth knowing this wasn't some unusual act of harshness. Over the previous 5 years, roughly 70% of the cases that came before that board ended in denial. Grayson's request landing in the no pile was, statistically, ordinary. What wasn't ordinary was the room. Neither Grayson nor his lawyers showed up to the hearing. Sonya Massey's family did. Her parents, her son, her cousin. They sat there and gave victim impact statements. Outside the building, more than 24 demonstrators stood and asked the board to keep him locked up. And Massey's father, James Wilburn, said something that day that cuts straight to the heart of this whole final chapter. People had told him that maybe, out of compassion, Grayson should be allowed to die among his family and friends. His answer, reported by Capital News Illinois, "My baby didn't have a chance to die amongst her family and friends." 23 days later, Grayson did. And consider what his sentence had actually become by then. 20 years was the maximum, but under Illinois law, that second-degree murder conviction carried day-for-day good time credit, which in practice cut it closer to 10. Remember, he was convicted of second-degree murder, not first, after the jury was handed that lesser option. A conviction many of Massey's supporters never felt matched what the body cam showed. Then, of that effective 10 years, he served roughly half of one before he died. A killing that drew national protests, a maximum sentence that made headlines, and the time actually served measured in months. So let's go back to that silence and to the out-of-state custody, because now the timing starts to take a shape. This is the point where I have to be careful with you, because this is exactly the kind of story where speculation runs ahead of the facts, and I'd rather give you the real questions than a fake answer. Here's what's verified. He asked to come home to die. The state said no, specifically because his dying had already been counted once. 3 weeks later, he was dead, out of state, with no official cause released, and the corrections department declining to explain. Every one of those facts is confirmed. Here's what is not verified, and I want to be blunt about it. There is no evidence, none, of foul play, of neglect, of anything other than the disease that was visibly killing him. When you see comment sections spinning this into something sinister, understand that they are filling the silence with imagination. The most likely story remains the simplest one. A man with stage 4 cancer died of stage 4 cancer. But most likely is doing work in that sentence that an official record is supposed to do. And that's the legitimate question this ending leaves behind. Not a conspiracy, but an accountability gap. When someone dies in state custody, in the middle of an active legal case, the public record shouldn't have to run on unnamed sources. The family's own attorneys, Ben Crump and Antonio Romanucci, put it plainly: his death in custody from cancer does not bring Sonya back. Which brings us to the thing almost no coverage has touched, the part that might actually change what this case means on paper. Sean Grayson's conviction was not final when he died. Follow this. He was convicted in October of 2025, sentenced to the maximum, 20 years, in January of 2026, but his lawyers had already filed a motion for a new trial, arguing, among other things, that the judge wrongly barred certain defense expert testimony, rejected their proposed jury instruction on police use of force, and blocked evidence they wanted to introduce about Massey. When the trial judge refused to reconsider the sentence in May, the case moved up to the 4th District Appellate Court, and according to the State Journal-Register, Grayson had his own attorney working that appeal. That appeal was still alive when he died. Here's why that matters. In the American legal system, there's a doctrine, courts call it abatement, that deals with exactly this situation: a defendant who dies while his direct appeal is still pending, before it's ever been decided. In some jurisdictions, when that happens, the conviction can be wiped out entirely, vacated, on the logic that the person never got the chance to see his appeal through, so the case is treated as if it never reached a final judgment. Now, I want to be precise because this varies from state to state, and I'm not going to tell you I know exactly how Illinois will handle it. Different courts have gone different ways on this over the years, and some have moved away from erasing convictions automatically. So I am not telling you Sean Grayson's conviction is gone. What I'm telling you is that his death dropped a genuinely unresolved legal question onto a case everyone assumed was closed. Does a conviction still stand when the man convicted of it died before his appeal was ever heard? That is a real question, and right now, it does not have a public answer. Sit with the irony of it. Sonya Massey's family spent 2 years watching this case grind toward the one thing that felt like justice: a conviction, a maximum sentence, a badge finally held accountable. And it's at least possible that the legal record of that conviction now gets tangled in a doctrine most people have never heard of. Not because anyone found Grayson innocent, but because the disease reached the finish line before the courts did. And here's the quieter tragedy underneath that legal question. If you go back to the trial itself, the strongest witness against Grayson's self-defense story wasn't a prosecutor, it was his own partner. The other deputy on the scene testified that he was confused, but not threatened, by Sonya Massey, that she never said or did anything that made him think she was a danger. He testified he was caught off guard when Grayson opened fire, and a sheriff's chief deputy told the court that policy violations had occurred during the shooting. That is the record Grayson's appeal was trying to unwind, and it's part of why so few observers expected him to win it. even before cancer ended the question for him. So where does that leave things right now? Grayson is dead. No official cause of death has been released. The corrections department has not explained the circumstances or why he was held out of state. His appeal was pending, and the status of that appeal and of his conviction is now an open legal question. And the family that fought for years is left, once again, without a clean ending. And step back from Grayson for a second, because the case already outgrew him. His death doesn't touch the things that outlasted the trial. The $10 million settlement Sangamon County paid Massey's family, the federal civil rights review that ended in an agreement forcing changes to local policing, or the Sonya Massey Act, the state law now requiring departments to dig deeper into an applicant's history before handing them a badge. The exact kind of background check that might have flagged Grayson years earlier. Whatever happens to his conviction on paper, those don't unwind. I keep coming back to one piece of this. The last formal thing Sean Grayson did in this case was ask the state for the mercy of dying at home, and in the same breath, refused to give Sonya Massey even the acknowledgement that he was wrong. He maintained she attacked him. That was his final word on the record. And maybe that's the truest answer to why so many people, a review board, a grieving father, a crowd outside a government building, felt no obligation to hand him the compassion he would never extend to her. A note before you go. Everything in this video is drawn from court records, official statements, and reporting from outlets covering the case, and I've tried to keep what's confirmed separate from what's still unanswered. Where questions remain open, I've called them open, not because there's a hidden crime, but because a death in state custody deserves a clearer public record than this one has so far. Nothing here is a claim that anyone acted unlawfully in Sean Grayson's death. If you want to follow where this goes next, whether Illinois releases a cause of death and what happens to that pending appeal, please subscribe to this channel, because those answers are going to come out quietly, and we'll break them down the moment they do.